All right, so today is August 4th, Tuesday, August 4th, Tuesday, August 4th. And I messed up. Uh, full transparency always during my learning process of trying to get this down. But I literally made the same mistake that I made this past Friday. Um, if you have not watched that video, the mistake that was made on Friday and the mistake that was made today is getting into a trade, it not playing out my direction, and then FOMOing into a second trade. So, what happened here? The green line is the 5 minute orb high. So, I hopped in as soon as it had this first. This isn't even considered a pullback. This first red candle from the actual getting out. Because I was looking at it. I'm like, okay, this candle is pretty beefy. You know, outside of the 5 minute. So I'm gonna go ahead, let it come back some. I'll set my buy just outside of the 5 minute. So if it comes back up, then I'll catch it, and then I'll set my stop loss. This was a fair value gap at one point, so I'll set my stop loss a little bit below the fair value gap. So my order went in, and this candle here dropped below my fair value gap. That was the first trade. So then I FOMO'd and I'm like, all right, I know the trade is going up. So let me go ahead. Just because something hits your stop loss, it doesn't mean that it was a bad trade. So in this case, I still knew it was going up. So I went ahead and hopped back into the trade, and I literally did the same exact thing expecting for a different result. I set my buy here again, because by this point this candle had got back up and it was somewhere around here. So I set my buy back here again, and I set my stop loss this time a little bit lower. So the first time I think my stop loss was set, I maybe lost 200, but now it's set a little bit lower. So this time, instead of losing 200, the number was larger. So like I said, it came up and then it came back down in the second candle. So I never gave a chance for this candle here to close. So I was not tapped out, or actually looks like, yeah. So I did get tapped out again. This is where I set my stop loss at the first time, right in this area. Second time I set it a little bit further down, but as y'all see, I still got knocked out. So that was the second trade. And then after that second trade had fumbled, the third one was just me. Like, that's when the doubt crept in, and that's when my mind says, hey, maybe you're wrong. Maybe it's not going up. Maybe it'll come back down to the other side of the range, or come back down to the halfway area of the range, and then it'll go up. That's when that doubt started creeping in. And so then, for the idiotic reason, me just playing tricks on myself, I made a short trade, because obviously when I kept making longs, I kept getting hit. And as soon as I made the trade, immediately I knew, yeah, I don't need to be in this. But at that point, instead of canceling, it was pretty much already too late. To be honest, like, I was already down a little bit, so it's kind of like, hey, I can either let it play out and hope for a miracle, or I can just sit here and let it be. So immediately, like I said, I went for a short, and it started coming back up. So I was pretty much out very, very quickly. But with that being said, 3 trades, another account blown, all in the course of 3-4 minutes, all because of 2 things. Number one, I said in my rules that I made for myself that I'm still needing to follow and still working on being disciplined with controlling. But one of the rules is, whenever I make a trade, I need to immediately document and journal it so I can see where I messed up at. That keeps me from actually making a second potential bad trade, because I had actually had a chance to think over the first one. I did not do that. Number 2, my max loss was 450, and obviously the combination of all 3 of these was more than 450. After the second trade, that should have been it. But I FOMO'd and made a third trade, and so I ended up losing more than the 450. And I think even before that, it might have been closer to like 500. But anyways, it is what it is. So I did not follow that rule. I think those were the only two rules that were broken. But as y'all see, this is the reason why rules are meant and needed to be followed. Because if you don't have those rules set in place, and if you don't follow those rules, you end up like me right now. It is what it is. But I'm not scared to put out my faults. I'm not scared to put out my wrongs. I'm not scared to publicly correct myself whenever I am wrong. This is all a learning experience. But with that being said, sometimes you have to create, think of, and in a sense, form your own strategies that help you out. So the 5-minute orb has been good to me. Last week I went 5 for 5 using orb-based strategies, and everything played out perfectly. But I felt like last week I actually had a lot more patience when getting in. And then I had a couple days where the 5-minute orb ran off on me, which resulted, or yesterday actually, the 5-minute orb pretty much ran off on me and I was not in the play. So that made me kind of get a little bit of FOMO today that I needed to get in early. Whereas last week I was not FOMOing in. With that being said, patience. Can't say it enough. I always say it. But something else I'm going to add into using the orb is incorporating this 8 EMA trend line. You can say it's the right way to do it. You can say it's the wrong way to do it. But it's just something to help me out as a reference whenever getting into a orb play. So the 8 EMA is something that I've just recently added. If y'all notice another thing here, even though it says I have 8 indicators up here, I'm really not even using them all. This here is for the 5-minute orb to automatically mark it out, so I don't have to manually do it every time. This here is obviously the 8 EMA line. I also have a 15-minute orb that I cut off and on, as well as the 5-minute orb cut it off and on. Then I have fair value gaps to where it easily marks them. And then I have where it shows the broadening formation. So even though it says I have 8 indicators, most of it is more or less just keeping it easy so I don't have to mark out everything. It's not really, a whole lot of noise in the sense of bars and everything and lines going everywhere. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. This market structure, when I pretty much leave it off the majority of the time. Time frame continuation, don't really need that too much. I more so check this by myself now. I've turned it off, but I can actually get rid of this. I don't even use it anymore. So I don't really use a whole lot, but the 8 EMA is something I've been learning about over the course of the last few days, and I'm going to start utilizing it more in other ways. The 8 EMA, for those that don't know, is just a moving average of the last 8 candles. So with that being said, if you notice, the 8 EMA acts as somewhat of a support/resistance. So if you're in an uptrend, once you cross back over the 8 EMA with a nice push, that lets you know, okay, we're most likely flipping into an uptrend here after we were previously in a short little down. So cool. It stays above the 8 EMA. Like I said, the EMA acts as a support/resistance. So then it comes back down to the 8 EMA. And then, like I said, it acts as a support. So it comes down and it bounces back up off of it. Comes up again, bounces off of it. It gets a little bit below, but as y'all see, it closed above and it continues to do that. So with that being said, if you use the 8 EMA as somewhat of a marker, at least this is how I'm planning on using it, as like a little bit of a marker to see where your quote unquote support stands at, then in my particular case, it would have actually helped or saved me. So I'm going to start actually paying more attention to it in my orb strategy usage. because when I bought in on here, I would have easily been able to look and see, oh, it's a wide gap between where I'm buying and where the 8 EMA is. Like I said, whenever the 8 EMA is acts as a support, then it's always a chance that it can come back down and tap on it, or come back down and go below it. But on the flip side, if you notice as it comes up, if I would have, say, bought here, then right when it was kind of at the EMA acted as a support, and what did it do? It held support and it came back up. Same thing moving up the chart. Say if I would have not bought any of these and I would have still been waiting patiently, then it came away from the EMA, away from the EMA. You don't want to buy here because there's a nice gap between the EMA and the candle. You don't want to buy here because same thing, it's a nice gap between the EMA and the candle. But then I see that it pulled back to the EMA. Also, with that being said, it pretty much bounced off of what we had already marked as a previous support slash demand zone. So this would have been my indicator if I was using the EMA to say, hey, this is probably a pretty decent point to buy. But anyways, this is just something else that I've recently been adding into my thought process, trying to utilize a little bit more. I know people use multiple different EMA lines. I'm not trying to get too crazy on it. So this 8 EMA, and they also have a 9 EMA that I've been looking into as well. But these seem to be a good kind of middle ground. Not overwhelming, not hard to understand, not confusing, not trying to keep track of a whole lot of stuff, but it does provide you a reference as to what could possibly come about. Because at some point or another, the candle is going to always come back down to the EMA line. Some point or another. The further detached the candle is from the EMA line, then the further down or the further back to it can possibly pull. The closer you can buy to the EMA, then the better, usually, because if you buy closer, depending on which way you're aiming for, if you can buy closer, you're probably buying at one of the better points in the trend, and then at that point it's up to you to actually just select the correct direction. But same thing if I were to switch to a 3-minute. So on the 3-minute here, I wasn't looking at the 3-minute when I was making my trades. But on the 3-minute, I bought in this particular candle. I would have noticed, hey, the EMA is way down here. I wouldn't have bought here because once again, the EMA is way down here. And then I may have just waited it out. And then again, here, when the EMA and the candle are closest, I already knew it was going up, so I knew my direction already. But here, when the EMA and the candle are the closest, this would have kind of been, hey, let me go ahead and try to get in when I see that the candle is getting back close to where this EMA is. But the EMA, it does trail, so it's not going to look like this whenever you buy. The EMA, it's going to still be kind of figuring itself out as to where it's going to end up at based on the candles to come. But as y'all notice, the EMA at this point, it was outside of the orb line. It was clear of my previous support slash demand line. So even if I did not get in at the very, very lowest point on this particular candle, it at least would have been safe to say, hey, even if I got in here or if I got in up here, I'm not saying you would want to do this, but I'm just using it as a reference. But wherever on this candle, if I got in at, it would have been safe to say, hey, my EMA is down here. I see that it's aiming for this particular area. So let me go ahead and put my stop loss a little bit below that EMA, a little bit below the support, the support line, the moving support line, which is how I'm treating this. So yeah, I'm gonna probably start implementing that whenever I'm doing my orb and see how it goes. Do a little bit of retesting on it just to see if it's something that I can utilize, but I'm pretty sure that it is. And yeah, we'll go from there. But another account blown. It is what it is. Every day we try to get a little bit better. So I'm gonna do some paper trading for a bit, and I will be back with y'all maybe tomorrow. I have some stuff I got to do later in the week, so we'll see how it goes. But I'll be back with y'all, in the next video. Thanks for watching.